Hello, my name is John Sebesta, and I'm the editor of the UN Chronicle, the online magazine of the United Nations. This is Chronicle Conversations. 29 May marks the International Day of United Nations Peacekeepers. On that day, we celebrate the successes of UN peacekeeping and remember those who put themselves in harm's way in the cause of peace, including the many peacekeepers who have been killed in the line of duty. Unfortunately, many of the perpetrators of violent crimes against peacekeepers, including the crime of murder, have not been held accountable. Our conversation today will focus on the organization's renewed efforts to bring those criminals to justice, and I'm very fortunate to have with me Mr. Stéphane Jean. Mr. Jean is a Judicial Officer and Coordinator in the Office of Rule of Law and Security Institutions, also known as ORLSI. That's part of the United Nations Department of Peace Operations. He serves as the focal point at United Nations headquarters for accountability for crimes committed against peacekeepers, and he is the designated lead for justice support in the West Africa region, including in respect of the activities of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, or MINUSMA. Over his career, Mr. Jean has served in several different capacities related to the legal aspects of peacekeeping in many different parts of the world. Mr. Jean holds a license in law and a master's of international law, both from the University of Ottawa, as well as specialized certificates from Harvard University and the United Nations University. Welcome, Stéphane Jean. I wonder if I can just call you Stéphane for now. Yes.
Thank you very much. All good, John. Pleasure to meet you.
Great to meet you too. Before we delve into the specifics of our topic and your work and the way forward, I wanted to note for everyone that you had some personal experience with the issue of violent crimes committed against peacekeepers. I wonder if you, or peacekeeping personnel I should say, I wonder if you would share with us what you've witnessed in the field and how you've been touched by those events.
Thank you again for your time, John, and thank you for this interview today on this important topic really for us and the Department of Peace Operation. Really, I think it would be interesting perhaps for your viewers to start with just an anecdote. I spent about half of my career in the field and the other half here at headquarters. And during my assignment with the United Nations mission in Mali, MINUSMA, as Deputy Chief of the Justice and Corrections section of the mission, I recall taking that plane, going from central Mali and going to Bamako. That was back in 2014. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting in that cargo plane, and I was looking in the middle of that plane towards the end, and I saw this metal box there covered with a net. And I asked the crew, because these are planes that are fairly well open and so forth, and you can communicate with the crew quite easily. And I asked them, you know, what is this? This is quite strange. And they told me, well, this is basically the remains of one of our colleagues who was killed actually the day before while serving there, and his remains were being brought to Bamako for an official ceremony and for repatriation. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting there just close to that metal box and thinking to myself, what more can we do to ensure justice for our fallen colleague? Because at the end of the day, I could have been in that box. One of my friends could have been in that box. Another colleague could have been in that box. So what can we do to bring justice for the family of this person and his memory, but also to ensure that those individuals that are thinking of attacking our colleagues know that eventually they can be brought to justice. So for many of us, this is really beyond, I would say, aspects related to the work or legal related issues and responsibility of the organization towards its own staff and personnel. It is really a moral and ethical issue. And this is really, in my case, I can say something that has been a personal drive in dealing with this issue over the past few years.
When was this? When did this happen?
That was in 2014. So the mission had been established for about a little bit less than a year at that time. And already we had several of our colleagues. In that case, this was a young military officer from Burkina Faso who had been killed in service there. Yes. So, and we've seen certainly, and I can get back to this later on in the interview, but a significant increase, as a matter of fact, across our mission since 2013 and these type of incidents, unfortunately. Mm.
Well, unfortunately, you're right, because this is a tragedy that's happened several times before, and it parallels the history of these kinds of tragedies, parallel the history of the organization. In fact, in July, as you know, 1948, Ole Bakke, a Norwegian man, became the first United Nations peacekeeper to lose his life in the line of duty. And he was killed while serving with the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization, also known in Palestine, also known as UNSO. So along those lines, do you have an idea of how many peacekeepers have been lost to date?
Yes. Since 1948, meaning since that first operation in the Middle East, we've had a total of 1,091 of our colleagues serving in peacekeeping operation, but also in special political missions across the globe that have been killed as a result of what we call malicious acts, essentially homicide, while serving with these missions. And what we've seen also is since 2013, we've had about a third of these fatalities that have occurred since 2013, just over 300 of them. So there's been a significant increase, as we could see, as our colleagues are deploying in environments that are increasingly dangerous and volatile. We've seen an increase, unfortunately, in these type of incidents, both in terms of people getting killed, but also, unfortunately, those that are injured as a result of these actions.
Do you have an idea of how many have been injured as well?
Yes, more than 3,037 as of today. Some of them with debilitating injuries that they will have to live with for the rest of their lives.
And these are situations, just to be clear for everyone, that this is not an accident. These aren't people who died because of an accident of some kind of military nature, but these are people that were targeted and killed as they were murdered.
Exactly. They were killed quite often as a result of, always as a result of hostile acts, whether it's a mine action incident in Mali or one incident in Eastern Congo where a colleague is shot during an ambush, and so forth. So we've had these incidents across mission. And as a matter of fact, I mentioned the case in Mali, but I also serve in the mission in Kosovo, where, as I recall, back in September 1999, within a few days of my arrival there was a gentleman who I have met from Bulgaria who was assassinated in the street, in the center of Pristina. So this is something really that is close to us. It is something also that needs to be addressed from an accountability perspective, not only in memory of our colleagues and also for their family, but also critically to ensure that those individuals know that are killing our colleagues, that are maiming our colleagues, know that they can be brought to justice.
Right, and that leads to my next question, actually, because, I've worked at the United Nations for many years now, and I've always known that many peacekeepers have been killed in the line of duty and made the ultimate sacrifice for peace. But I'd also assumed that most, if not all, of those perpetrators had in some way been brought to justice, but I'm finding out now that that's not the case. How many cases would you say remain unresolved today?
It's difficult to say. Out of these, the number of cases that I mentioned, 1,091 personnel that were killed, it's difficult at this stage because we do not have a sort of an overview across missions of these incidents since 1948 in terms of investigation and prosecution of these cases by the national authorities. And by the way, the primary responsibility to investigate and prosecute these cases remains with the national authorities. However, what we've seen since 2018 and with the increased focus of our department on these cases since that time, we've seen an increase in the number of individuals that were identified, detained, and a certain number of convictions. As a matter of fact, more than 50 convictions. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Central African Republic, and Mali in relation to these cases. And we focus on the operation in these three countries, namely MINUSCA, MINUSMA, and MONUSCO, because more than 80% of these fatalities have occurred since that time. We've also had, and this is something I can add here, a conviction in Lebanon back in December 2020 for the killing of 2 Irish peacekeepers back in 1980.
Wow.
These young men were killed during their service with that mission. As a matter of fact, they were kidnapped and then killed. But what is positive, I would say, in terms of the investigation and prosecution by Lebanese authorities in that particular case is that even 40 years later, one individual was brought to justice and was convicted in relation to the acts that he had committed 40 years earlier. So for us, the way we see this is that it might take some time for justice to take place. However, we are patient, we will support national authorities, and justice can be done even 40 years later.
So that involves a lot of investigative work for the people, yourself and the people you work with. And I think 1980 is just the tip of the iceberg, right? If we're going back to 1948, there are a lot of cases that still need to be solved, and it's very concerning that a lot of it's happening recently. So, you have any understanding of why maybe in the host countries, as you said, are supposed to provide most of the security for peacekeepers and people working in the country? What's happened there? Is it what's going on?
Each context is different in terms of the situation of impunity, as we've seen in many of these operational contexts. However, there are some common trends that we've seen in many of these circumstances, and I can speak specifically of Mali, the Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. What happened is that many of these incidents where our colleagues are killed occur in areas that are beyond the control of the state. So you have, for example, a patrol in northern Mali, and there's an IED, or improvised explosive device. Some of our colleagues are unfortunately killed or injured, but there's not necessarily a presence of the state on the spot in terms of local law enforcement, police, and so forth. So that's a first important challenge, because some of these regions are not necessarily under the full control of the state. Agents of the states are not necessarily present. So how can you facilitate an investigation and prosecution in these instances? Always is a challenge, as you can imagine, because the first step is to ensure that presence and support them and their deployment. A second challenge that we've seen also across the board, or in many circumstances, is of course we are deploying in all states that are facing major challenges, typically conflict and post-conflict situations, where the ability of these institutions to effectively investigate and prosecute these cases is severely hampered by the lack of resources, whether in terms of logistics, communication. Sometimes, given the level of complexity of the cases, for example, when explosives are used, there's limited capacity in terms of forensic. So there's limited capacity quite often of state institution, whether at the law enforcement level, prosecution level, to properly investigate and prosecute these cases. In a certain number of instances, we've seen also some sensitivities, given that there are ongoing peace processes and investigating individuals that may be in strong political positions, let's say, and therefore there's a situation of impunity that can also result from that particular situation. So there's an array of different reasons for that, but I would like to emphasize also, beyond all of this, the foundation is the political will, both from the host state, but also from the United Nations and from other international partners, to push for these investigations to take place. And this has been a challenge also at the political level, really to push for this to actually take place.
Right. I mean, so sometimes there's a lack of institutional structure, but we also need to support what's happening and what you're trying to accomplish, and what even the host countries are trying to accomplish, because in essence, you're not prosecuting anyone. You're assisting local authorities in prosecution under their set of laws and their judicial system. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the countries, as I mentioned, the three countries, Mali, Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where 80% of the fatalities, or what we would qualify as homicide, have occurred. The missions there have very strong mandates in terms of building or assisting national authorities in building the capacity of their policing institution, law enforcement institution, the judiciary, prosecution services, as part of the overall mandate of these missions to support national efforts really for the investigation of serious crimes that are often driving the conflict in these contexts. So therefore, we have a strong mandate from the Security Council. There's always a challenge in terms of available resources, because the resources that are made available to us as the United Nations system, and as well as the resources provided by international partners, are often quite limited and fall short of the actual needs of the national authorities. So it is very important to provide that support to them, whether it's in terms of training activities, in terms of advisory activities, in terms of provision of material or financial assistance for these institutions to be built up. Because again, the capacity of these institutions is often quite limited, precisely as a result of the conflict and policing institution. For example, if you go in some areas in Mali or in the Central African Republic, you will see in visiting the police station that they have very little capacity to actually undertake their mandated responsibility overall, and also, of course, in the context of crimes against peacekeepers, or more broadly against the civilian population, because this goes in many ways hand in hand.
Right. Yeah, it's a vicious circle, really. If you have weak institutions, that can lead to conflict, and in the post-conflict period, you also need strong institutions.
Precisely.
It's all part of one.
Precisely.
Well, I know that we've had some recent renewed activity in the Security Council. On August 18, 2021, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2589, 2021, on accountability for crimes against peacekeepers. And among other measures that are set out in that resolution, it commits member states to take appropriate measures, I'm going to quote this, take all appropriate measures to bring to justice perpetrators of criminal acts against UN personnel. And so first of all, what was the impetus for this resolution? I know that you know it intimately, but what sparked the interest in getting this done?
Well, I would say there was an increasing recognition of the importance of this issue as part of the safety and security more broadly of United Nations personnel. We've had a landmark report that was issued back in 2017, the Santos Cruz report, that was commissioned by the Secretary General precisely in recognition of the fact that there was an increase in those fatalities as a result of malicious acts and many peacekeeping operations since 2013, primarily in the 3 operations that I've mentioned, but not only. So as a result of this, there was a lot of reflection, certainly, among member states, among the Secretariat, on ways and means to address this issue. And one of the ways that was considered really, and that has been carefully calibrated, I would say, by member states, is on the issue of accountability for crimes against peacekeepers. And this resolution was adopted under the presidency of the government of India, who has been an invaluable partner, I would say, and I should emphasize here in terms of moving forward. It was also co-sponsored by 84 member states, meaning just under half of the membership of the organization. This resolution was adopted unanimously by the Security Council, which is also a clear reflection of the fact that the Council on this issue is clearly united, and this is an issue that Council believes should be adequately addressed. It also echoes very much many other international tools and standards that are already in place, in which many of the member states are part of, in particular the Convention on Safety and Security of United Nations Personnel.
Right. I mean, there is a little bit of precedent for the resolution as well. In 2018, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, our current Secretary General, launched the Action for Peacekeeping Initiative, or I think it's called A4P, yes, to renew the world's commitment to peacekeeping and peacekeepers. But following the adoption of Resolution 2589, 2021, which is this resolution we're speaking about, there was a new initiative called the Action for Peacekeeping Plus Plan, so it's A4P Plus. That was created to implement the resolution or implement the major provisions of the resolution. And I took a glance at this, and at first glance it reminded me of the agenda, 2030 agenda. And it looks like Sustainable Development Goals because it talks about accountable results and deliverables. So it's looking for concrete action. Can you tell us about one of the key provisions of this plan as it relates to your work?
In many ways, the Action for Peacekeeping sort of Declaration of Shared Commitment, A4P, as well as the A4P Plus framework, and so far as it relates to accountability for crimes against peacekeepers, for us as a Secretariat, is very much a way to operationalize Security Council Resolution 2589. And there's a certain number of parameters in that resolution that we are operationalizing through that in terms of promoting accountability at the national level, which is extremely important because the host country have the primary responsibility to investigate and prosecute these cases. As a matter of fact, they have this legal responsibility under the status of force agreement or status of mission agreement. In other words, these legal instruments that are signed between the host country and the United Nations Secretariat. The resolution also makes a certain number of important points in terms of collaboration between the host states and the concerned operations. So this is part of a collaborative effort where missions, when so mandated, do have a responsibility to provide the assistance to national authorities, whether it's in terms of information sharing or in terms of capacity building, training, advisory support, even material assistance so as to enable the state to take on their responsibility to investigate and prosecute these cases. We have also a requirement under that resolution to establish a comprehensive online database for crimes against peacekeepers that will be accessible to member states. Again, this will be quite important in terms of information sharing to know really where we are in terms of the investigation and prosecution of these serious crimes and crimes against peacekeepers. And also, we have in this resolution a responsibility for the Secretary General to provide regular updates to the Security Council. So again, in many ways, sort of an approach to bring greater visibility to this issue. This is not something that will be solved in 1 year or 2 years. This is a long-term endeavor, but we feel strongly that we have breached that wall. We have breached that wall, but we need the continued political commitment from host country, from the Security Council and other member states so that we can ensure accountability for these crimes.
So I hope this brings some visibility as well, what we're doing right now. But it sounds like the plan covers all actors in a sense. It has some provisions for host countries. It's got provisions for you and the Secretariat, and it's also got the Secretary General on board. So it looks like a comprehensive set of commitments that are being made and looked after, and that's important, I think. So I wonder if, now that we've talked about the problem and what's being done about it, I wonder if you could tell us about your work specifically. You're an attorney working with the United Nations system. You're a staff member to achieve justice for peacekeepers who have been killed in the line of duty. We've talked about that. In our conversation earlier, you indicated that some progress had been made. You talked about some convictions. Could you let us know where your efforts stand now and what successes you've had so far and what you see as a positive outcome of this process? In other words, what will improve the situation of impunity and ultimately protect peacekeepers?
Thank you. No, this is really an excellent question. I think this needs to be looked at from, I would say, an holistic perspective in terms of the safety and security of our personnel. And there's a certain number of measures that are being sort of taken by our mission in terms of passive security at the camps, for example, in terms of training, in terms of equipment, and so forth. So this is part of a broader thing. And I would say, certainly for us, we have adopted internally a set of standard operating procedure on the prevention, investigation, and prosecution of crimes against peacekeepers. And the first step is really prevention, because we're focusing, of course, our discussion here sort of after the fact and accountability. But this first aspect is extremely important from an operational perspective in terms of equipment, in terms of training, in terms of many other things to ensure the safety of our peacekeepers, but also certainly in the context of our work from a criminal justice perspective in terms of reaching out, for example, to potential community, in terms of community programs, in terms of our quick impact programs, in terms of the relationship between our peacekeepers and the population. This is extremely critical. The support from the population and the environments that we operate is extremely important because, as you can imagine, often the victims actually of those that are committing these crimes, they're not only targeting United Nations personnel, but quite often also, or almost systematically, the local communities. So it is quite important to reach out. Quite often the victims will be there, the witnesses also will be in these communities. So if they've seen something, it is quite important also for them to have a relatively positive opinion, of course, as one can imagine, of the international presence in order for them to collaborate with national authorities.
They need to trust your presence as much as you need to trust them to help you out.
Absolutely, because some of this information may come in advance that an incident is likely to occur.
Right.
And by preventing this incident, of course, we prevent a lot of things, a lot of potential negative outcomes in terms of, unfortunately, killing of our colleagues in some circumstances or having them seriously injured. So the preventive aspect of this is also absolutely critical and quite important.
Okay. Well, before we finish up, I just want to reiterate to anyone watching who's lost a family member or who has been touched by these kinds of tragedies themselves that not just on the 29th of May, but we're always here. Your colleagues at the UN Secretariat and throughout the world are concerned for your safety and are looking for solutions to make sure that people are safe and that people are brought to justice as well. So that's very important. With that, I'd just like to say thank you again, Stéphane Jean, for allowing us to take some of your valuable time today to bring us up to speed on the problem of violence against peacekeepers and the good work you and your colleagues are doing to try to alleviate this tragedy. And as always, I'd like to thank our great colleagues at UN TV for the use of their studio and their assistance overall. It's always helpful. And we thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.